Joe Letteri.
Did you like the movie?
Yeah!
Well, to begin with, something that I always wondered about you as I sort of followed your work before I had the first chance to interview you during Avatar and now today. How does somebody get involved and interested in this sort of work, which, you know, the type of stuff that you're doing today didn't exist even just a few years ago, let alone when you were a kid. So what was the thing that turned you on to this sort of work?
Yeah, it came out in a couple of different ways. I mean, as a kid, I was interested in films, and the kinds of films that made you just sit up and say, wow, how do they do that? We're always kind of cool, you know, starting with the old Colin, the Harryhausen movies, you know, Star Wars, 2001, the original Planet of the Apes. I mean, there's just a lot of films that just kind of make you start to think about, you know, the world in a different way. And at the same time, I was always interested in how the world works. So I've done a lot of, you know, math and science and things like that. It started turning on to the idea that you could use computers to make pictures. And just in playing around with that, I just started getting more and more interested, and I had a chance to do that on my first feature film, which was Star Trek VI. I got to blow up a planet. It was the first thing I did, so I thought, this is a pretty cool job, so I'll stick with this for a while. And then the next film that I did was Jurassic Park. Stephen came to us and said, can you make realistic dinosaurs? And it's like, sure. And then went away and figured out how to do it. And it's been that way ever since. Just, you know, I've been really fortunate in getting to work with a number of directors who just come up with these good ideas at about the right time when we could almost do it, but they've been willing to take the chance and let us work and figure out how to do it.
That's amazing. Well, I guess when you say us, I think it's important for to put it into some context as well, which, Weta, can you explain what it is, where it is, and what about that place allows you guys to produce such amazing work?
Well, Weta is a visual effects studio that Peter Jackson started a long time ago, back when he was doing The Frighteners. I joined about 10 years ago to work on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I've been there ever since. We're in Wellington, New Zealand. We are about 850 people there right now. And what it is it really is a community of you know, filmmakers and visual effects artists. The thing that I think I really enjoy about what we have there is everyone is interested in making films, and everyone takes their piece of it like it's a little movie. Every shot is just considered in context of the whole film. We have also just a tremendous interest in, you know, the world and how it works, the physics, the science behind it. And, you know, kind of putting that all together, you can come up with ways to make these things that look, you know, unbelievable, but still kind of look believable. And the other thing is we've been really lucky, and then Peter Jackson just kind of lets us do what we want. So, yeah.
Well, I guess that leads into the next question, which is, when along the line did somebody come and say, let's do another Planet of the Apes movie? There's been a lot of them. Many of them have not lived up to people's hopes, and there are, you know, there's sort of a fan base that's been there for a long time, and I think they've been disappointed many times. In this case, you really exceeded most people's expectations, and I just wondered, when did that idea come about, and what was your reaction? You know, were you as optimistic at the beginning?
This is about a year and a half ago that John Kilkenny at Fox, who we do a lot of work with, sent me the script and said, you got to read this. And I read it, and I thought, wow, yeah, we should make this movie. This is really cool, you know. And so we just all met. They brought Rupert on board. We talked to Andy Serkis to see if he was interested. He liked the script, so he came on board. And it really came together quickly because of the way it had to. Like, we asked Andrew Leslie if he would shoot it because we just all worked together in the past. It was one of those things that the schedule was so tight that everyone just had to jump in and get going if we were going to make the deadline that we wanted to make. But it was all driven by this really great script that Rick and Amanda wrote. It just really, you know, it fulfilled the promise, at least to me at least, of from watching the original film, and especially when you come to that great ending, starting to think about, well, how did we get there? What happened to make all of this, you know? And taking it back to, you know, the present day, and the idea that we're going to start off with real chimps, and we're going to see how they gain their intelligence and what causes this evolution to happen. Just seemed like kind of an ideal project.
I think decades, centuries from now, when people look back at this chapter, this era of visual effects development and just the way it's all evolved, I think they will look at you and the team at Weta, and I think they will also look at this amazing partnership that you have had over years now, over a decade now, with Andy Serkis. And I just want to ask you to talk about what it is that he does that, he's not, just for people who aren't aware, you guys are, I believe, now still in the process on The Hobbit, so he'll be back as Gollum. And just what kind of skill set does he bring that obviously, most people could not, even most very good actors might not be able to?
It actually does come down to acting. Andy is just a great actor. Just love working with him. Like I remember back doing these scenes with Gollum when we're on a mocap stage with just like a handful of us recording his performance. It was like watching great theater, but we were the only ones in the audience. There was some really moving stuff there. And what Andy does so well is he loses himself in the character. He's not worried about, do you see my face or can you tell that that's me? He wants what he's driving through the character to come through the screen. And for us, that's a godsend because, he makes choices that allow us to push through this sort of digital veneer that we add onto it and to make the characters really come alive. It can be in big ways or it can be in subtle ways, right? Like in this film, our first moment of really seeing Caesar was the shot that I think everyone saw, if you saw the trailer, the shot where he's sitting in his cage and you just see in his eyes the light turning on, like I'm going to make something happen here now. But not only that, I have to make something happen here now. You could tell just from that one moment that this was a turning point. And that was the first shot we did of Caesar. That was when we knew that we had that spark of life in him. Because one just looked there and said, that's Andy. That's what he did. So we knew we had it, and we're just able to take it from there.
Well, the eyes are sort of something that I think you've been asked a lot about over the years because it hasn't always, it's sort of, if people have had one thing to pick on motion capture about, it's been, that there hasn't always been necessarily human lifelike, or the ability to recreate sort of human eyes. And yet, in the last few years, you guys have made great strides in that area, and I just wonder if you can explain. I think this might be the peak at the moment of that. How did it improve and get to the point where now that is no longer really a shortcoming for what you do?
Well, I think for one thing, people should understand that even though we talk a lot about performance capture, the aspect of it that brings a lot of this to life doesn't necessarily depend on that. By that I mean, you could get it wrong even if you're keyframe animating. So the subtleties of the eyes and the way we communicate using our eyes, you have to pay attention to, no matter what the technique is that's driving the performance. But when you are using performance capture, you have the advantage of working with really good actors who know how to use their eyes in a very subtle fashion. And so we say performance capture a lot. That actually means what it sounds like, where you're capturing the performance. The other side of it, of bringing that performance to the screen, is a whole separate technique. And that's where we tend to pay most attention, because the detail in human eyes is just amazing. And what you're really responding to is a lot of things that we take for granted when we're speaking with each other. But small movements of the eyes can convey a big emotion, right? I mean, the difference in a millimeter or two can make an eye look alert or sleepy. And when you're translating that to a character that you think is very similar to human, like an ape, but is not, you have to pay attention to those fine details. And that's really what it comes down to. We use a lot of technology to help us kind of bank our learning. So when we study a lot of performances, we capture them, we record them, we analyze all the movements in the face, because what we're trying to do is interpret the emotion. Let me take a step back. When you're doing standard motion capture before you could do faces with it, and you're recording the body, you put markers all over the body. Everyone has seen the dots on the suits. It's a very mechanical process. You track an arm movement, and you can say, right, that elbow just rotated 12 degrees, so I'll make my arm rotate 12 degrees, or Caesar's arm, say. When you're doing it with the face, you can't do that. There's nothing mechanical about it. In fact, it's still a little bit mysterious what actually happens with the muscles in the face. But fortunately, we know the muscles in chimps' face are laid out the same way as humans. And so we use a technique. It's actually called facial action coding system, for any of you who are psychologists. It was developed by Paul Ekman at the University of San Francisco. And it's a way of categorizing the muscles in the face. Originally, he was trying to use this technique to see if he could tell when people are lying. And so we use this same idea to figure out what all the activations are. So when we're tracking all those dots on the face, what we're really trying to figure out is how much is each muscle activated. And that gives you the state of the emotion at every single frame of film. Then, because chimps have the same muscle layout as humans, we activate their facial muscles the same way. So we're actually translating the performance. And so that's what we use the computers for, is to do this analysis and to bank all that information so that we can refine that technique and get it as correct as possible. But the final judgment we leave to animators and artists. Everyone looks at every frame of film right next to Andy and just says, do I feel the same way? Does it look the same way to me? And it's really that final judgment, that final artistic rendering that is what you have to count on in the long run.
Another thing that I think, from what I've read, you did differently on this film versus the others that sort of led up to it was the fact that you were able to have Andy be captured live alongside other actors, as opposed to being in a suit or something else. Can you explain in a better way than I just tried to what actually happened here that was different than on other films that you've done?
When we were doing Lord of the Rings, we knew that we'd get the best performance, not only from Andy, but from all the other actors, if Andy was actually playing the scene with the actors. So that's what we did. He had a suit on, like a gray suit, so that we could paint him out later. But after he did his performances, we went back to a motion capture stage, which was like a big gym with a bunch of cameras all around it. And we reviewed Andy's performances, and he watched them and matched them. So he had to go back and re-perform everything that he did. And then we had to take that information and fit that into the scene. What we had always wanted to do, though, was to just get his performance at the time he's doing it. And through the years, we've been working towards that and experimenting with it. And by the time we completed Avatar, we had done so much work with motion capture and performance capture that we thought we were ready to now bring that back onto the stage. And Caesar was the perfect opportunity to do that. So what we did is, in all the scenes that you saw, we hid motion capture cameras all throughout the set, throughout every set. Even the exterior sets, we have a way now to capture that data. So Andy's performance as he recorded it, and actually all the performers who did the various apes, that performance is recorded in the moment and then translated directly to the ape performances that you see in the film.
So with that, he didn't have any kind of suit, or he didn't have the dots all over?
He did have suit and he did have,
he did have
dots, exactly. Because you still need those things to make sure you're getting it absolutely right. There are ways to do it without, but I'd rather be safe, so we tend to just do whatever we can to make sure it's as accurate as possible.
And save you a lot of time?
Saved a lot of time that we didn't have.
A couple other quick things just in terms of the physicality of the apes that you had to make. How many apes appear in the film? Is there a count?
There's about 6 lead apes, and then probably about 15 or so sort of medium but featured apes, and then hundreds for the battle scene.
Well, I think part of what makes it seem so realistic is the fact that you got the hair right, and you also got some of the skin and the muscle structure very. And I know that a lot of work went into that, so I just want to ask you if you can explain how that was arrived at.
Yeah, again, it's all very physically based. Like when we build a creature, we look at the design. Say Caesar, for example, and we then take that and try to put it together with reality as much as possible. So if I take a step and talk just about some of the mid and background apes, like the apes that you see at the beginning of the film, going through the jungle, those are all based on real apes. The Wellington Zoo has a troop of about 20 or so apes, and they gave us incredible access to just photograph them and film them and get as much reference as we needed. So a lot of those apes, if you went to the Wellington Zoo, you would recognize them. And so what we did is just tried to copy that physicality from the outside as much as possible, And then from the inside, we build a full body. You know, we build a skeleton, we build a muscle system, there's a layer of fat underneath the tissues, and everything is solved. We do this incredible biomechanical solve for any of you who are really into the physics of it. It's all solving as correctly as we know how to do with what the muscles and the various masses are doing. And we extend that all the way up into the face. So you've got this performance of the face that's being driven by the actors, but all the movement of the skin, the wrinkling and unwrinkling, and all the dynamics of the skin that go along with that are being done with this simulation layer that happens on top of everything. The skin, we took you know, molds from real skin, mostly actually from human skin, and used that for a lot of the close-up detail. We used a technique called subsurface scattering to figure out how light transmits in soft tissue, both skin and the eyes. In fur, we created a fur system that we call a barbershop because basically the artists have to sit there and groom every hair on the head individually by hand. It's really hard, but it gives you the most natural technique because it's what you would do if you were, you know, grooming an actor on set. So all that detail goes into it, and then we run these computer simulations for all the lighting and the muscle movement and everything that will just take hours, days, you know, per frame to just make sure we get it all right.
Well, I won't go on too much longer because I want to make sure the audience has time to ask questions, but I do have to ask you, I think the scene that blows people away the most here, the sequence, is obviously the Golden Gate Bridge sequence. And if you can just talk about the amount of time and effort that went into that one, which I think is really must have been the hardest. Wouldn't it have been for everything, I would assume?
Yeah, exactly. It was a big scene because we had to create that whole environment and all the apes. So we shot this film in Vancouver, and the Golden Gate Bridge scene was also shot right outside of Vancouver. So it's a couple of establishing aerials that were done with an aerial unit. And then what we did is we built a roadbed that was 100 meters long that represented a section of the Golden Gate Bridge with the guardrails and some of the lights and things on the side. And then we could drive the cars on, we could bring our 8 performers on. The motion capture cameras were hidden all along this 100-meter span with like little birdhouses to keep them out of the rain. And every time we staged a bit of the action, we knew where it would be in context of the sequence. And so then we built a digital version of the entire Golden Gate Bridge and the entire Bay Area. And what we would do is take our photographed action, and wherever it was supposed to be, like you start off, you know, at the toll plaza near the South Tower, we would drop in our bit of photography into the digital bridge. So when the camera would pan around off the part that was shot live, you'd be into the digital bridge and you would pick that up. And so we staged that all the way along the length of the bridge for the various sequences.
Okay, so just for my last contribution here, I want to ask just sort of the first thing that comes to your mind, but what is the next sort of step for visual effects with what you're involved? Is there something that you guys are working on that's, you know, because I don't think people even saw Avatar coming, most of us in the real world, and I just wondered, is there something big like that that's brewing? And I don't know if you can even talk about it if there is, but I'd be curious.
It's funny, I get asked that a lot. It comes down to the script.
Yeah.
It really does. Like even this movie, we were making Tintin when you know Fox sent that script through, and it's like, okay, well, we got to do this movie, so we did it at the same time we were doing Tintin. But yeah, if that hadn't come through, you know, we wouldn't have known. Like we have lots of ideas about what you can do to make things look real. And it's a whole toolkit that we like to, you know, open up to filmmakers, but it really starts with the right story at the right time.
What would you say? What do you say to the actors? There are certain actors who are a little apprehensive about the kind of work that you do because they say if you can take one actor and create a character in the way that you've done this, you can take. Why wouldn't you be able to take one actor and create a whole movie's worth of characters? And you know, I think there's some sense of fear or trepidation about that. Why should they not be concerned?
Because it's really hard.
And, well, I guess sorry.
Well, you know, everyone does ask about creating digital humans. Again, you really have to have a reason to do it. Like, no one is really going to recreate Marilyn Monroe with the time and expense it takes to try to do this, because your first question is going to be, who's going to perform her? You know, and you don't have the real thing anymore. And a studio would rather groom someone to be the next big actor. That's what they're banking on, and that's what we all want to watch, really. What we're doing is characters that are not human, that can't be performed that way. And from that point of view, it actually brings a lot of actors into the process who otherwise wouldn't be part of the process. I mean, Avatar wouldn't have happened if we couldn't do this. Jim waited 10 years to make that movie until he thought we could pull it off right. And that was all, that was a big ensemble cast driven, all art by the whole team of actors. Same thing here. There's a lot of actors behind all those Apes that you're seeing. So I think, I hear what you're saying. I hear that a lot. I think it's coming from actors who haven't actually tried it.
Right. Do you think, though, that the day will ever come in the same way that not that long ago computers were so expensive that the average guy would not have one? Will the price of what you do, will something enable that, do you think, to come down to the point where it can be...
No, it'll never get cheaper.
And the last thing is this. Andy Serkis is now, through, in collaboration with you guys, and I think you're each seems essential to each other's process, but he has never been recognized really by, whether it's the Academy or the Golden Globes or the Screen Act, the awards dispensing groups that we have in town. And because of that, some people are saying, it seems, this is as good, if not better, a performance than those that, that tend to get nominated that sort of live action. Should there be, in order to correct that, should there be a special category or something at the Oscars for motion capture performance, best motion capture performance, or something along those lines, in the way that, that we've added other categories over the years as technology has merited it? Why shouldn't that happen?
I think because you don't necessarily want to separate, acting from the performance. That's what everyone's having, a hard time with. I mean, by the way, Andy has been honored. He won a BAFTA for his performance as Ian Jury, but that was him being live on screen, which we get to see very, very rarely. But it's the kind of thing where it really is the performance that's coming through. But people are having a hard time understanding how can you separate performance from the recording of the performance. That's what I think is really new here. And a lot of people can have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. Yet when you watch Caesar, you can tell it's Andy. If you know Andy's work, you know that that's him. There's no mistaking it. So I actually think it's going to be a bit of a generational thing. I mean, actors coming up today who are working with this technology for the first time are not afraid of it, and they understand what the contribution is. And I think a lot of that resistance is going to go away. However, I prefer to not wait to see Andy get recognized, because I thought this was a pretty powerful performance he gave this year.
And for the record, he agrees with you, even though it would be in his interest probably to have a separate category, because he'd probably have 10 Oscars at this point. But let's turn to the audience. If you could say your question, then I'm going to repeat it just because we're also recording this. I want to make sure that your question is picked up. So, sir, if you can.
Hi, congratulations. My question is a kind of simple two-part question. First part being, do you think that being able to tell these stories in new ways will bring up new stories to be told? And the second part of the question is, if you feel that there is some relation within this story and the concept like Terence McKenna, Food of the Gods, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
So I guess the first part is, will new technology lead to new stories? And then also Terence McKenna, is that?
The first thing, more than new technology, new ways of telling stories will enable new kind of stories.
Okay.
Technology or not, more in communication-wise. And Terence McKenna, Food of the Gods, is kind of a strange theory that most, mainstream science like to diminish as food, but I think there's something to it in this story as a way of something that activates the monkeys into thinking outside the box somehow.
Thank you.
I think it will enable new and different stories to be told because you've got, films like Avatar that Jim had that idea in his head for 10 years before he thought that we could bring it to the screen. It really required these techniques to do that. You look at a character like Gollum, sure, you could have put him in makeup next to the other actors, but it doesn't seem to have the same magic, that same quality of you're really seeing something special. And what I think that's about is when you're creating these characters, you're tending to focus on certain qualities to them that you're really trying to bring out. And they're essentially very human qualities, but by presenting them in this new and interesting fashion, I think it causes people to think about it. That would have been a very different story if these were a bunch of men in prison that were trying to break out. It would have had a lot of the same heart, but you probably wouldn't have sat up and thought about it so much, because the idea that you're seeing that in another species and you're seeing that come to life causes us to reflect about, well, what are the origins of these feelings? The loss he feels for the home that he thought he had, and the way that propels him to think now he's got to build his own world, and it's got to be all about his freedom. People have talked about this as the apes taking over. It's really not. It's the apes looking for their freedom. So those are things that we can all relate to. So yes, the more it allows people to tell those kinds of stories and really kind of focus on those beats of the story that might go unconsidered otherwise, I think it's valuable that way. And so to answer the second part of your question, I think that kind of magic actually makes everything bigger. It allows us to have discussions like this that we wouldn't normally be having if there wasn't this extra bit of magic that's causing us to think about it.
We have another guest, sir.
So what kind of special things are we going to see in the sequel for this movie and what's in The Hobbit?
What sort of special things are we going to see in a potential sequel for this?
Prequel, but it's
and
still
in the upcoming The Hobbit, which would be out next winter, is that right? Or
The Hobbit we're shooting in 2 parts. So the first half will be next December 2012, and the second half the year after that. And to answer your question, Brad, I can't tell you.
not even a little hint.
Gollum will be in The Hobbit. I can guarantee that. And there will be apes in the sequel.
anyone in yes, sir.
How much more complicated does it become when you add the 3D element?
It can complicate the production enough, for example, so that in this film, because the time was so tight, that Fox decided not to go that way because they wanted us to just put all of the effort, and by us I mean everyone involved with the film, to put all the effort into just getting the film and the story and the characters on board. If you're shooting a live action film, for our end of it, there's a lot of handwork involved with things like rotoscoping and green screen extraction and rig removal. All that kind of paint work that you do tends to have to be done mostly by hand, so it's very time intensive. If you're looking at a film like Avatar, where the sequences that we were largely responsible for were all in the virtual world, or Tintin, where everything was in the virtual world, because we've actually created this world and we're lighting it, and you've got actually 3-dimensional physical characters running around the same way you do in the real world, all we have to do for a film like that is put another camera on it. So that actually becomes technically simpler. So then the real focus becomes what you need for a story point of view. How do you use stereo to the best effect? And the first thing you have to answer is, what is that effect? My personal feeling is stereo should be immersive. It shouldn't be in your face. It should draw you into the story. And that's something I very much learned working with Jim on Avatar. That's his style. Stereo should be used in a natural fashion, the way the human eyes work. And so we kind of followed the same technique, for example, when we did Tintin. And so that makes it very clear what you're after stereo-wise. That then the final consideration is really editorial. When you're cutting the shots, does the pacing give you enough time for the audience to readjust? Because normally when you're cutting, you're looking point A to point B across shots. And audiences are used to doing that now after so many years of film, and especially in 2D. Like, people will stand for fast cutting now that 20, 30 years ago you wouldn't have had. But with stereo, audiences have not learned to anticipate yet where they're supposed to be looking. So as a filmmaker, you have to guide the audience not only to where they should be on the screen, but where they should be in the screen. So you have to make sure that that's comfortable for them going from shot to shot. So you need to allow for the pacing and the staging to do that properly.
Yes.
I saw Tintin and Recent also had great work on both of these films. I'm wondering, when you do the facial capture thing, do you ever have to tell actors don't get Botox before you do it?
The question is, when you're doing facial capture, do you have to tell actors not to get Botox?
No, because again, if their performance, we put video cameras up around everywhere, if their performance looks good and it's what the director wants, that's what we're trying to put up on the screen. So hopefully, they treat this the same way as if they were shooting it live, and they're not going to do that anyway.
Are we going to go? Well, let's take a lady first, and we'll come back.
It's not a question. I just wanted to say thank you for your contribution to special effects and all that, because you use the word magic, and that's how I feel all the time when I see special effects done well. I just feel it's like it's a tool to be used carefully, and I think you do, because you're able to realize our dreams, and I think that's pure magic. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I did point to this show, and the next one we'll come back down all the way here. We'll be so, yes, sir.
So it's a little weird to be talking about the uncanny valley when you're looking at apes.
But I knew someone was going to bring that up. So.
You're looking at apes as opposed to humans. It did seem that baby Caesar was a little less convincing than Caesar as he got older and more mature, and clearly Andy Serkis was coming into play. So where did baby Caesar come from?
The baby Caesar was all keyframe animated. Andy picked up at the adolescent stage, and so he did the adolescent and the adult. So yeah, having that performance to guide you really does count for a lot.
Are there any special effects that you don't like to do in CGI still?
Are there any special effects that you don't like to do in CGI still?
No, we used to shoot a lot of miniatures, for like buildings and architecture and for pyrotechnics, things of that nature. But what happened is when we were making Avatar, because of the stereo, it was really difficult to figure out how we would shoot miniatures and get everything to lock together properly in space. And especially for pyrotechnics, to be able to get the timing and the flying sequences and everything that we wanted. So we just committed to doing everything digitally, to just solving the problem. And it actually works out really well for us, because one of the other things that's come into play, especially starting with Avatar, is this idea of global illumination. And what that means is, in the past, you're shooting plates and you're putting a character in the plate. You can take the lighting that the director of photography did and mimic that and focus it on the character that you're seeing on the screen. But when you're creating the world, you have to account for all the light sources and the way light bounces around everywhere. And so, for example, if you're going to have a scene where there's a big explosion in it, and you need to account for all the light that's doing, you've got to make an explosion that looks like that one anyway, to kind of get the light to cast everywhere in the scene properly. Well, once you've done that, you might as well use the explosion you just created. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm pretty blown away by this, but I just wanted to say you have been responsible for integrating actors and special effects in ways that, for me, just growing up with your films has been staggering. And to see the process along the way, like when somebody mentioned The Abyss, for me, that's one of my favorite films, and it's so script dependent, it's so beautiful, and all these films are such beautiful films aside from being, special effects masterpieces. I'm really amazed though, there seemed to me to be like a point where Andrew's performance goes from being the monkey and when the adolescence sort of fades and his his innocence sort of fades, and he takes on that resolve of a human, and you see his will and his determination really change. And I'm just curious what that was like to see, and what it was like to see these actors moving from, really animal portrayals into these combination portrayals. It must have been difficult to direct at points too.
Well, fortunately, Rupert had to do that.
I know that, but for everyone involved
Well, I think the actors enjoyed just that challenge, because how often do you actually get to play a character through all the growth stages. I know, I've talked with Andy about it a lot. That's one of the things that he really did enjoy about this film, even looking at the script, that you get to see the character and follow it all the way through. Like, for me, one of the really good moments is when Caesar's sitting there playing with that Statue of Liberty puzzle, right? And the ruckus starts to happen outside because, you know, what's going on is he's gone from being like the kid in the family to suddenly, you know, finding out he's adopted and you know, what's his place in the world. And
yeah.
he's got all these kinds of conflicting emotions going on, you know, inside of him. But he's sort of calmed down and he's just kind of enjoying his own time, but something sets it off. And you know it's all this stuff bubbling underneath the surface, right? And he kind of overreacts in a way, but, you know, in a way that you can imagine, like a big 13-year-old kid,
yeah.
you know, reacting to if he saw his grandfather getting beat up. And to me, those are the things that were really telling, those kind of really subtle moments that drove me forward.
I think that we probably used enough of your time, so I want to thank you very much. And